Welcome to Story Harbor, where every story finds a home. Emotional, cinematic tales of love, sacrifice, and second chances. Subscribe for stories that touch a heart.
The cameras were rolling, the studio lights were blazing, and Joy Behar had no idea she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. Somewhere between her third question and her fourth, she would cross a line with a man who had spent 40 years refusing to play Hollywood's games, a man who had survived plane crashes, built furniture with his own hands, and stared down studio executives who thought they could tell him what to do. Harrison Ford didn't come to The View looking for a fight. But Joy Behar was about to discover that the man who played Han Solo and Indiana Jones hadn't been acting when he told the galaxy to never tell him the odds. This is the story of 20 minutes that changed everything. Subscribe now and drop a comment, because what you're about to witness is a masterclass in what happens when arrogance meets authenticity. The View studio felt different that Friday morning, charged with an energy that the production staff couldn't quite name. Harrison Ford was the guest, and everyone who had ever watched one of his interviews knew that this could go any direction. He was famously unpredictable in press settings, charming one moment, cutting the next. The kind of man who had once responded to a journalist's question about his legacy by saying, "I'm a carpenter. I build things. Sometimes those things are movies." At 82 years old, Harrison Ford walked onto the set with the deliberate movements of a man who had earned every gray hair and every line on his weathered face. This was a man who had carved one of the most extraordinary careers in cinema history out of almost nothing. A man who had been a carpenter when his contemporaries were already stars, who had turned down roles that became classics because they didn't feel right, and had somehow still ended up in two of the most successful franchises ever made, not through calculation or ambition, but through a stubborn insistence on doing things his own way. The audience applauded warmly, though there was a tentativeness to it. Ford's reputation preceded him. He was not known for being easy, for giving the answers people expected, for playing the game that most celebrities played reflexively. He was known for building his own furniture, flying his own planes, and having absolutely zero patience for questions he considered stupid. He settled into the guest chair with a grunt that the microphones caught, nodding once to the hosts without the practiced smile that most guests deployed immediately. Whoopi greeted him with the respect of one industry survivor to another. Sarah Haynes seemed slightly intimidated. Robin Roberts leaned forward with professional curiosity. Joy Behar studied him with an expression that suggested she had already decided how this interview was going to go. "Harrison Ford, welcome to The View," Whoopi began. "It's an honor to have Indiana Jones himself sitting with us." "Thanks," Ford replied, his voice carrying that distinctive gravel. "Though I'm not him. I'm just the guy who wore the hat." The audience chuckled. It was a typical Ford deflection, humble on the surface but carrying an edge. Joy jumped in before anyone else could speak, but not with a question, with a statement.
"You know, Harrison, I've been watching your interviews for years, decades actually, and I have to say, you always seem like you'd rather be anywhere else. Like doing press is some kind of punishment. Don't you think that's a bit ungrateful? All these fans who love you, and you can barely be bothered to crack a smile?"
The observation was sharp and clearly designed to knock him off balance, but Ford simply turned his head slowly to look at her, his expression unchanged. "Is that a question or a diagnosis?" he asked. "It's an observation," Joy replied. "You've had one of the biggest careers in Hollywood history, and you act like it's all been some kind of burden. Some people would kill for what you've had." Ford was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, but carried an undercurrent that made several crew members exchange nervous glances. "I've been doing this for 50 years. 50 years of interviews, premieres, photo shoots, press junkets, and in all that time, I've learned something. The work matters, the publicity doesn't. I show up and do the job because I'm a professional. But I'm not going to pretend that sitting in a chair answering the same questions I've answered 1,000 times before is my idea of a good time." "But that's part of the job," Joy pressed. "Connecting with fans, being accessible, showing some warmth." "Is it?" Ford's eyebrow raised slightly. Or is that just what people have decided celebrities owe them? I made movies. People watched them or they didn't. That's the transaction. Everything else is noise. The bluntness seemed to catch Joy off guard, but she recovered quickly. Fine. Let's talk about the work then. You've played Han Solo and Indiana Jones for decades. Some critics say you've essentially been playing the same character your whole career. The grumpy, reluctant hero who doesn't want to be there. That's not exactly range, is it? Ford laughed, a short, dry sound that contained no warmth whatsoever. Same character? Have you actually watched my films, Joy? The Fugitive, Witness, The Mosquito Coast, Presumed Innocent, Regarding Henry. Those are all the same character to you? He shook his head slowly. I've played doctors, lawyers, cops, scientists, presidents. I've done comedy, drama, action, romance. But sure, if you only remember Han Solo and Indiana Jones, I suppose you could convince yourself that's all I've done. I'm not saying that's all you've done. I'm saying those are the roles people remember. And maybe there's a reason for that. The reason is that those films were enormous cultural phenomena, Ford replied evenly. Billions of people saw them. They became part of the cultural fabric. That's not a limitation of my range. That's a testament to the power of those stories. He leaned forward slightly. You know what's interesting, Joy? I've never heard Clint Eastwood criticized for playing tough guys. I've never heard John Wayne's legacy questioned because he made westerns. But somehow I'm supposed to apologize for being in two of the most successful franchises in film history? Joy's face had reddened slightly, but she pressed on. Let's talk about your personal life, then. You're married to Callista Flockhart. There's a significant age gap there, over 20 years, and you adopted a son together. Some people have wondered whether relationships like that are really about love or about something else. The studio went very quiet. This was personal territory, and Ford's expression shifted to something colder. I'm going to give you one chance to clarify what you mean by something else, he said. His voice was quiet but carried a warning that was impossible to miss. Joy seemed to realize she had stepped into dangerous territory, but pride prevented her from backing down. I'm just saying that Hollywood has a history of older men with younger women, and sometimes the motivations aren't purely romantic. Power dynamics, career considerations, image management. Stop. Ford's single word cut through the air like a blade. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you suggest that my wife married me for my career. Callista was already successful when we met. She didn't need anything from me. We fell in love. We've been together for over 20 years. We've raised a son together. That's the reality. Your implications are insulting to her, not to me. He turned to address the camera directly. For the record, my wife is the best thing that ever happened to me. She's smart, she's funny, she's kind, and she puts up with me, which is no small thing. Anyone who wants to question her motives can come talk to me directly. He turned back to Joy. But you won't do that, will you? Because it's easier to make insinuations on television than to actually engage with real people about their real lives. Joy tried to regain control. I was just asking questions that people wonder about. No, you weren't, Ford said flatly. You were fishing for controversy, that's different, and I've been around long enough to know the difference. He crossed his arms, settling into his chair with the posture of a man who had no intention of leaving. Let me tell you something about my life, since you seem so curious. I started as a carpenter. Not because I was killing time between auditions, because I needed to eat and nobody would hire me as an actor. I built cabinets and furniture for people while trying to get my career going. For years. While other actors were going to parties and making connections, I was sanding wood and installing doors. His voice carried a mix of pride and old frustration. George Lucas hired me to build cabinets at his house. That's how I got the audition for Star Wars, not through an agent or a connection or a lucky break, because I showed up, did good work, and somebody noticed. That's the foundation my career was built on. Craftsmanship, showing up, doing the job right. He paused, something more personal surfacing in his voice. You know how long I was a carpenter? Almost 15 years. From my late 20s into my early 30s. While other actors were becoming stars, I was measuring twice and cutting once, learning how to work with my hands, learning patience, learning that there are no shortcuts when you're building something real. His eyes seemed to look past Joy into some distant memory. I built a recording studio for Sergio Mendes. I built a sun deck for Sally Kellerman. I renovated Joan Didion's house. Real work for real people who expected real quality. And that's the work ethic I brought to acting when I finally got the chance. You don't phone it in. You don't cut corners. You do it right, or you don't do it at all. He looked at Joy with something approaching contempt. So, when you suggest that my success has made me ungrateful, or that my marriage is some kind of arrangement, you're talking about things you don't understand. I've earned everything I have. Through work, through persistence, through refusing to give up when the industry told me I wasn't good enough. Joy seemed to be searching for a way to regain the upper hand. Fine, let's talk about something else. Your plane crashes. You've had multiple emergency landings, incidents where people could have been hurt. At your age, some people think it's irresponsible for you to still be flying, that you're putting others at risk for your hobby. Ford's expression shifted to something almost amused. My hobby? I'm a certified pilot. I've logged thousands of hours. I've been flying for over 30 years. I own multiple aircraft. I've done helicopter rescues in the Wyoming wilderness, pulling lost hikers off mountains. I've worked with the Civil Air Patrol. Flying isn't a hobby for me, it's a passion, it's a discipline, and yes, it's a risk. But so is driving a car, so is walking across a street in New York City. He leaned back slightly. The incidents you're referring to were equipment malfunctions, not pilot error. They were investigated thoroughly by the FAA, and I was cleared of any wrongdoing. In fact, in at least one case, my emergency procedures were cited as exemplary. I landed a plane on a golf course when the engine failed and walked away. Most people would have crashed. I didn't, because I know what I'm doing. He paused. But you knew that, didn't you? You just wanted to ask the question in a way that made me look reckless. That's what this whole interview has been. Taking things out of context, implying things that aren't true, hoping I'll get angry enough to give you a soundbite. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. I'm not going to give you that. I've been doing this too long. I've dealt with people like you my entire career. People who think they can rattle me, get under my skin, make me say something I'll regret. It doesn't work. His voice dropped to something almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. You know what I've learned in 82 years? The people who try hardest to tear others down are usually the ones who have built the least themselves. It's easier to criticize than to create. Easier to question someone else's life than to examine your own. He looked around the studio, then back at Joy. I've built things, movies yes, but also actual things, with my hands, furniture that people use every day, a ranch that I've worked for decades, a family that I love, a career that has lasted over half a century. What have you built, Joy, besides a reputation for making people uncomfortable? The question hung in the air. Joy's face was now fully red. I've had a successful career in television and comedy for decades, she said defensively. Have you? Ford's tone was almost curious. I don't know. I don't watch television much. I'm usually out flying or working on the ranch or spending time with my wife and son. You know, actual life things. The dismissal was brutal in its casualness. Joy stood up abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be insulted. Then don't, Ford replied, not moving. I was invited here to do an interview. You're the one who decided it was going to be an interrogation. I'm just responding to what you've given me. This is my show, Joy said, her voice rising. Actually, I believe it's Whoopi's show, Ford said, glancing at Whoopi, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed amazement. And Barbara Walters created it. But sure, it's your show. The correction was precise and delivered with the timing of someone who had spent decades working with the best screenwriters in the business. Joy stood frozen, clearly unsure whether to stay or go. Ford continued, his voice now carrying something that might have been genuine advice. You know, Joy, I'm not your enemy. I'm just a guy who made some movies. I came here today prepared to talk about work, about life, about whatever you wanted to discuss. But you came in with assumptions, with an agenda. You decided before I sat down that you were going to put me in my place. He shook his head slowly. I'm 82 years old. I've been put in my place by experts, directors who didn't believe in me, studios who thought I was finished, critics who said I couldn't act, time itself. You're going to have to try harder than a few loaded questions and some tabloid insinuations. He smiled, and for the first time, it almost reached his eyes. Sit down, Joy. Let's start over. Ask me about acting, about building things, about what I've learned in 50 years of doing this. I'm happy to have that conversation, but if you're just going to keep trying to provoke me, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing now, sitting here, comfortable, watching you get frustrated. Joy remained standing, her hands shaking slightly. I think we need a commercial break. We don't need anything, Ford replied. But if you need one, go ahead. I'll wait. Something in his absolute calm seemed to break Joy's composure completely. She turned and walked off the set without another word, leaving behind a studio that had gone completely silent. Ford watched her go, then turned to Whoopi with a shrug. Was it something I said? The audience, which had been holding its breath, burst into laughter. Whoopi was shaking her head, a smile playing at her lips. Harrison, you are something else. I'm a carpenter who got lucky, he said simply. That's all I've ever been. Sarah leaned forward, seizing the opportunity. Can we actually ask you about your career? About what you've learned? Ford nodded. That's what I came here to do. And for the remaining time, freed from Joy's hostile presence, Harrison Ford gave one of the most engaging interviews of his career. He talked about working with directors from Lucas to Spielberg to Villeneuve, about the discipline of craft, about finding love later in life, about what it meant to still be working, still flying, still building things at 82. He talked about the importance of environmental conservation, a cause he had championed for decades, about his 800-acre ranch in Wyoming, where he worked the land and escaped from Hollywood whenever he could, about why he still did his own stunts well into his 70s, not for ego, but because he believed audiences deserved authenticity. The body breaks down, he admitted with a wry smile. I've had injuries, but there's something about actually doing the thing, not just pretending to do it, that comes through on screen. The audience can feel the difference. They might not know what they're feeling, but they feel it. Sarah asked about his children, and his voice softened noticeably. 5 children from different marriages, ranging in age from their 20s to their 50s, each finding their own path. He spoke about the challenges of being a father while having the kind of career that took him away for months at a time, about mistakes he'd made and lessons he'd learned. I wasn't always present when I should have been, he said quietly. Work took priority when it shouldn't have. That's something I live with. But my children know I love them. And I've tried to do better as I've gotten older. Sometimes the best thing you can do is acknowledge your failures and keep trying. The audience left that day having witnessed something extraordinary. Not a fight exactly, though it had contained elements of one. Something more like a demonstration of how to handle hostility without becoming hostile, of how to refuse to play someone else's game without losing your composure, of how decades of experience and a lifetime of actually doing things gave a man the quiet authority to make loaded questions seem small. Joy Behar would return to the show after the break, but something had shifted. The other hosts treated Harrison Ford with visible respect for the remainder of his appearance, and viewers at home had seen something that would be discussed for years to come. The moment when Harrison Ford proved that you don't have to raise your voice to win an argument. You just have to be exactly who you are. And if who you are is a carpenter who built a legendary career with his own hands, that's more than enough. For those who had grown up watching him swagger through cantinas as Han Solo, who had cheered as Indiana Jones outran boulders and faced down Nazis, who had been moved by his quieter performances in films like Witness and The Fugitive, There was something deeply satisfying about watching the man behind those characters. He was exactly what they had always hoped he would be. Direct, honest, unimpressed by fame, including his own. A working man who happened to have become one of the biggest movie stars in history. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Did Joy Behar get what she deserved, or was Harrison Ford too harsh? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.